I want to thank you for being here for this lesson up on the first day of the week. Last week we talked about what is our worship, this idea of giving our life, that it is our worship, the way we live our life, the things we do, the way we act, the, the giving ourselves over to God in life, not just in formal worship, but in our life, worshiping God, knowing or others knowing and seeing that all that we do for God. And so this week, I want to, in some manner, continue that thought. Is in the Old Testament, he says, "You shall have no other gods before you." And so this is what I want us to think about today, this no other gods. Because so often it is so easy to involve uh, everything we believe in our life. In Psalms 29, verses 1 through 2, he says, "Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord, the splendor of holiness." He's saying, give all to this Almighty. Look to him. Know that it is his power, and know that it is he who has the strength. Give him the glory that is due his name. His name. Worship the Lord, the splendor of holiness. It seems that we live in a time when man seeks power and wealth and of all kinds. It's not just the wealthiest of men, but it seems that even those just what we would call regular Joes, those who work for a living, are seeking to have those things that each believe will bring them life and will give their children more than they had. That mindset seems to increase generation by generation simply because we're taught by those who have preceded in each generation or preceded us. God gave to Moses this commandment. When he began giving the commandments to Moses as they should be, this is the first commandment that he gave him. We want to look at Exodus 20, verses 1 through 6, and I want us to think about what he says. He said, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself carved images or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands who love me and keep my commandments." The first thing we need to realize is, even though he's speaking of things that we might hold in our hands that are created or that are carved in the images of other things, that an idol is not just a statue or a figure, but anything that we put in place above God, anything that we look to other than God. And so often we do these things and we do not even realize that we have set ourselves in that situation. In Deuteronomy 4, verses 15 through 20, he said, "Therefore watch yourselves very carefully, since you saw no form on the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb," or this is Sinai, "out of the midst of the fire. Beware lest you act corruptly by making carved images for yourself in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is under the water or under the earth. And beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God has allotted to the peoples under the whole heaven. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace of Egypt to to be a people of his own inheritance, as you are this day." This idea that, number one, he says, remember, you didn't see an image. He said in verse 15, he says, since you saw no form on that day, as the Lord spoke to you at Horeb in the midst of the fire, beware. Beware lest you act corruptly by making carved images for yourself. He said, you didn't see me. I didn't want you to see me. I didn't want you to see an image because I wanted you to worship that spirit, that God. But he says down here in verse 20, but the Lord has brought you out of that iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance. You see, he brought those people there that they might have that which was his. They belonged to him, but that they would have all that he had. They would have all that he could give them. You know, in the passage in Exodus begins reminding Moses who this God is, saying, I am the Lord your God. It wasn't long before that, and when he had sent Moses, and Moses came to him in the burning bush, he told him that he was the I am. In Exodus 3:14, God offers this title, I am who I am. Iye Asher Iye. In essence, it is who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. That one without beginning or end, that one who was without creation, he was. But he was the creator of all. We have to get in our mind who this God is that we worship. That he is the Almighty, that he is great and grand and majestic. This idea that there was no, he wasn't created by anything or anyone. He was. Go back to Deuteronomy, the 4th chapter. You look at verses 1 through 14. He says, and you know, O Israel, listen to the statutes and rules that I am teaching you, and do them, that you may live and go and take possession of the land of the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You ever think about what he said there? Just listen to the statutes and teachings, that you may go and live and go in and take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving. When he gives that new covenant, he makes the same promise to go into that land, to go into that eternal rest with God. But he continues here, you shall not add to the word that I command you, you shall not take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I commanded you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor for the people, or for the Lord your God destroyed from among you all the men who followed Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are alive today. See, I have taught you statutes and rules as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who when they hear all these statutes will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people, for what great nation is there that has a God so near to us, or so near to it as the Lord our God is to us? I want us to think about that. We can have all of these other gods that we might take and put in possession, and that's gods with a little g. That we might take and bring, that we might look at, that we might look upon, that we might even set above God sometimes. But they're not near to us, not near like God is. They're not there to give us comfort when things fail. They're not there to help us along the way when we face the difficulties. He said, whenever we call upon him, and what great nation is there that has statutes and rules so righteous as to all this law that I set before you today? We see sometimes difficulties in these things. We think of the difficulty that man has in doing what someone else commands us. We think we can make our own decisions without input or instruction of another. But I want us to listen to the words again in Exodus. In that 20th verse, he says something that is very important for us to get a hold of. He said, but showing a steadfast love to thousands, that is, 1,000 generations. In other words, he's saying God is faithful. God is faithful to those who love me and keep my commandments. I want us to notice what he says, to those who love me. The commandments are there that we should have an intimate knowledge of them. But the indication of the wording of the verse says they're kept out of love for God. This commandment is even for us in the new covenant. As children of God who come through Christ, through the blood of Christ. I want us to think about that just a moment. As children of God who come through the blood of Christ, the price paid for forgiveness was through that Son of God. Tremendous price. A tremendous thing that God has done for his people. We go over to Romans and we listen to what he says as he speaks to man, as he speaks to the Jews who are in Rome, or the Christians who are in Rome. But he begins to explain some things, and I think a lot of it is helped to man itself, the things that he did. And he looks back at those who were in Egypt, but we could hold it to man today. They could hold it to those who were Gentiles of the time. That's happening even in that. But I want us to think about what he says here in Romans, the first chapter. Starting at verse 18, he says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. However he might have shown it to them, they knew of God. But he said they suppressed the truth. They covered it over. They kept from looking at it. They refused to see it. But I want us to listen to the rest of what he's saying here. In verse 20, he says, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. They have been seen. He had let it be known to all man. And even if it may be a little further down the road, we should be able to look out into this world and realize there is a creator. One who is able to do things that we cannot imagine. I don't think that's what he's talking about completely. His idea is they looked upon God and they saw God as an almighty. He told them, I am. I don't quite know what happened, nor do I understand before the time of Abraham. But people knew that God was God. He said, for although they knew, let's go back. He said, for this invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse, for although they knew God, see, he's given us a fact. He said, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking. and their foolish hearts were darkened. I want us to think about what he's saying when he says this. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. I think we ought to look at the world around us. We ought to look at ourselves and think about what he's saying. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. And so often we look and we think about how smart we are. Well, I worship God. I give him my life, but also you need, we look at money, we look at prestige. All of these things are so important to us. We began to place them above. He said, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and creeping things. He said they began to worship the idols. This goes back to the Israelites, but they were doing it in the time of Christ. People do it now. Even to a point, they began to look and see the things that they want to see. I want you to hear what he says in Romans 1, beginning in 22. Of these people who sought these things or sought this way, and I used the wrong verse, in 32, he says, though they know God's righteousness, or though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. And he's speaking of an eternal death in the way I see it, and not only do they not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. In other words, they encourage this type of behavior to give up God, to look elsewhere, to look to other gods, to look to idols, seeking those things. But he gives that indication that what they're doing is worthy of death. I want us to think for just a moment. They bow down to idols. And Paul indicates the cost of looking to idols. We may believe that we have very little difficulty in this area. However, there is a collection. I began looking and searching, trying to get a hold of this idea. I think we can pull it down to one point or two. But there's a collection of 10 things that are seen that many people place before God. These are those who are children of God who have answered this question. These are those of preachers who preach. It's not an internet or a Amazon question. It's one that has been put before men of the gospel and those who are supposed to be Christians. But those 10 things, many of them are things that we need to care for. We need to see over them. But sometimes we go too far. We begin giving more attention to these situations than we do to God. The first one is self, and I think that we can boil down most all of this to our self-centeredness, our selfishness, our want, our desires. We start placing things before us that say they're more important. Security, approval from other men, approval from other people, or the same thing, but approval from peers. Wanting to know that I am accepted. And so I began to look at those peers as being a God, because I'm looking to them as to how I live my life and what I'm doing instead of looking to God. He looks at this relationships can be that of an idol. You ever think about? And so often we take relationships either in our spouse or our children, or maybe business partners or a girlfriend or boyfriend, and we began doing everything, and we place emphasis on them so much. There was a woman made the statement. She said, I began to give everything I had to my children. I began to live every moment of my life for my children because I love them. And she said, I began to realize that I was doing what I was serving them and not God. It's possible. We see people every day who do that, who think that they must do so many things for their children to give them the things that they need that they forget about God. But we do it with business partners. We do it with spouses. We do it with peers. Then there's this idol of success or image, wealth. Money is one of those things that we find many passages in the Bible about it destroying man's relationship with God. It's not saying that it's bad, it's saying that if we look to it, it says that wealth is the root of all kinds of evil, and it has to do with how we look at it. Food, intellect, comfort. I was thinking the other day and think, well, I don't have a problem with a lot of these. And then I got to thinking about this idea that I have in my mind about seeking, wanting something more in my life. I want to do something for me. I could stop all of the things I'm doing and go live where I want to live and do what I want to do. But I need to be very careful because that could become my idol. It's something I've had trouble with most of my life. We need to be aware of what we are doing and of what kind of example we are to man. As Paul goes through these beginning chapters of Romans, he speaks to the Jews. And in Romans 2, verse 22, we've listened to all of these things that the Jews have done, especially those who saw themselves as teachers. But he said, you say that one must not commit adultery. Do you commit adultery? You're making a real question there. Do you abhor idols? Are you who abhor idols? Do you rob temples? They were becoming very rich at the situation that we're in. I don't think they saw themselves as robbing temples, but they were taking the money. It wasn't about God anymore. He says, you who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the laws. For it is written, for it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, because of the things that they were following, because of the idols that they had made for themselves. He said, they blasphemed God among the Gentiles. We need to be aware of who we are. We need to be aware of what we're doing. We need to be very aware of what we are really putting first in our life. In 1 John 5, 20 through 21, he says, and we know that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding. We have knowledge. We know. So that we may know him who is true. We know the truth. We know true knowledge. He has given us true knowledge. We are in him who is true, in his Son, Jesus Christ. He is the true God and eternal life. Little children, keep yourselves from idols. He said we need to go back and look and see what he has told us. We have been given, he has given us understanding so that we may know him who is true. We have the availability. Paul speaks about giving, Paul speaks giving warnings against looking to idols. We go over to Philippians, the 3rd chapter, but while he's doing this, he gives that warning that they're there, that they're in danger, but he also gives those who are children of God, those who remain faithful, he gives encouragement. In Philippians 3, verse 17, the brothers join in imitating me. And Paul's not saying me, but as he imitated God or Christ. And keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example you have given us, or you have in us. For many of whom have often told you, and now tell you, even with tears, walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction. Their God is their belly. In other words, they have formed an idol. They formed an idol within themselves. And they glory in their shame with their minds set on earthly things, to look towards the flesh. But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly bodies into his glorious, to be like his glorious body, by the power that enables him even to subject all things to himself. This idea, if we're willing to give ourselves, if we're willing to look to God and serve nothing more, serve God only, have no other gods before us. He said, these things are ours. Our citizenship is in heaven. It's not of this world. He will transform this lowly body, this body that we have done everything in the world trying to serve self and change, or could be. He's saying, just give God time. Because when we find ourselves in his presence, he will transform us. And our body will become like his, whatever that means. Psalms 37, 3 and 4. He said, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Maybe we're seeking the wrong desires. You see, if we give ourselves over to the world, we desire everything in the world. But he says, delight yourself in the Lord. Give yourself to the Lord. Look to that and its wonderful, majestic being. Give ourselves over. Delight in him. Find our love in him. We may have trouble with this word delight, but we delight in our spouse, or we should. We delight in our children, but we need to be careful. We can even delight in money. But he says, delight yourself in the Lord. Give yourself over to him. Look to him. Find all there is to find in him. And he will give you the desires of your heart. Well, if I have my delight set in him, the desires of my heart accord him. If we have the delight, our desires will be for him, to live in him, to have eternity with him. Have eternity with him. Our God is a great and wondrous God. And he gives us commands so that we know what we should do. But he lets us see the love that he has for us so that we might love him. Serve him out of love, not out of threat. That we might have that eternity in heaven with him. I want to thank you for being here. And I hope that you can look at these things and look at, each one of us, look at ourselves and say, am I putting my trust in something other than God? Am I looking to something more than God? Am I looking to it and thinking that this is my way to have the things I want? If I'm going to have true life and I'm going to have true enjoyment, I need to look only to God, only to God, and realize that he is the giver of good gifts. He's the giver of that which I genuinely need. Seek him each day. I want to thank you for being here today, and may God bless.